Thank you,
Yeah,
Danny.
cool. So it's now
Perfect.
recording, so we'll get people filtering. I'm going to turn my camera off, and this will be your show. All right.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. All right. Got over 20 folks in here so far, close to 30.
Oh, wow. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Joshua. Joshua, you're like a regular on this series. I love it. It's so reliable. Hi, everyone. Where are you all tuning in from? Sam, you're in LA, right?
Me? Yes, I'm in
Yeah.
North Hollywood.
Amazing.
Oh,
Hi from
wow.
Mexico.
Oh, from
Oh my
all over. This
goodness.
is so cool.
Germany, wow. Oh, we've got such a global audience. I love it.
Oh, this
Canada,
is so awesome.
woo!
Hello, everybody.
All right. Quite a few more filtering in. Sam, your bio said that you're from the Midwest. Where in the Midwest are you from originally?
So I always have to answer that question where it's like split in half between my childhood birth to like 12 years old. I was in Pennsylvania. I was in a very small town. If anyone's seen The Office,
Yes.
not Sacramento, that's
Britain?
Scranton. I grew up near Scranton. And so I'm always like, oh, it's the place from The Office. And then when I was 12, I moved to Indiana. So I was like 30 minutes outside of Indianapolis. My school was surrounded by a cornfield. It was very much that true
Oh,
Midwest vibe.
amazing. Awesome. Well, all right, we've got over 40 participants, so we can go ahead and get started. Hi,
Awesome.
everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Welcome to our AVG Pre-Apprenticeship Speaker Series. This series is from the BRIC Foundation, and it aims to provide early awareness and education about all the exciting careers that exist across animation, visual effects, and gaming. My name is Sarah. I'll be your moderator for today. I'm also BRIC's Director of Communications. And for those of you who may not know BRIC, we are a nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing representation across entertainment, gaming, media, and tech. And if you like this series in particular, we have a ton more learning opportunities during our Global Talent and Education Day at the BRIC Summit coming up this Saturday, the 16th. So definitely be sure to mark your calendars. Today we have a super exciting presentation all about storyboarding, as you can see from our fantastic guest, Sam King. And we'll follow that with an audience Q&A for the last 15 minutes of this session. Sam, as you may have just heard, is an LA-based but Midwest-born director, storyboard artist, and writer with an affinity for character-driven stories and comedy. She's worked for studios such as Disney TV Animation, Cartoon Network, Blizzard, and most recently, I think you just joined Titmouse, right,
Just
Sam?
joined Titmouse yesterday.
Amazing. All right. So with that, I'll let you take it away and introduce us to the world of storyboarding.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was such a nice introduction. I'm very, very happy to be here. Very happy to be with you all. Like I said, we're going to be talking storyboarding today. So I'm just going to start off with a very quick little introduction to myself. Like Sarah said, Midwest born, loved animation ever since I was a kid. As you can see with me in Aladdin here. I went to Cal Arts from 2009 to 2013. That's me in the pink there. I look very different now. My very first job, like very first, I was an intern on Transformers Prime. And then my first actual job where I got paid, I was a PA, a production assistant on The Adventures of Puss in Boots on Netflix. Went to be a revisionist on Clarence at Cartoon Network, moved up to a storyboard artist on that show. And then I went on to storyboard on Disney's DuckTales reboot from 2017. Went on to write and direct an episode of that show. And then from there, went to direct on The Ghost and Molly McGee at Disney. Um, Since then, I've also been directing and development at Disney. I storyboarded on Big City Greens for a while, done a couple of like other things, and like Sarah said, now I just started as a storyboard artist at Titmouse. So I'm very excited to kind of be spreading my wings. And just as another fun fact, I'm also a beekeeper. So here's a picture of me and 10,000 bees that I bought and now live in my backyard. All right, so storyboarding. What is a storyboard in the simplest terms? It is a blueprint of a script or an outline or just an idea that is drawn so that animators for a project or live action, but we're going to be focusing on animation, can follow it and know what to create in what to animate, basically. So what we see here is a clip from The Ghost and Molly McGee, where you can see the drawings. You can see how it's like, oh, okay, it doesn't have all of the details, but there's just enough that you can tell it's like, okay, we drew all the family standing on this couch and Molly looking over. And those are the kinds of things that you are, like I said, laying out a blueprint for your animators and your designers and the whole team so that you kind of give like the overall vision. And like I said, you can be storyboarding for TV like Clarence, for animated TV like Clarence, a feature like Puss in Boots and the Last Wish. This is a board by Anthony Holden. You can be doing game cinematics. This is a board by Mike Kozumi for Overwatch, doing it for advertisement. This is a Paul Phillips Cheerios commercial storyboard. And then they also do it for live action film. This is one of my favorite live action film storyboards of all time. It is a drawing by Ryan Johnson. If you know this shot, it's one of the best shots in the film. And sometimes this is all you need is just, you know what? I look at this, I know what I need from this. So then if that's a storyboard, what is the storyboard artist? So I always kind of say, like, as a storyboard artist, you're the first director, you're a cinematographer, you're a little bit of a writer and a little bit of an editor and an actor and a layout artist and sometimes a lighting designer and sometimes a character designer. And also you have to do file management. It's a lot. It like putting it out like that, it's like too much, way too much stuff. So we're gonna kind of go to what the core of being a storyboard artist is. Don't panic. You don't have to worry about all of that stuff separately. The way that I look at storyboards at their core is all about intent. What are you trying to say? What do you want the audience to feel? How can you represent that visually using your storyboarding tools that I'm going to share with you today? Especially if there's no dialogue to reiterate what you're trying to share. So if you take nothing else from this talk, please always come back to, what is my intent? What am I trying to say? So there are a lot of tools with storyboarding. I'm going to break this down to what I believe are the three major tools. You have your shots, you have your cuts, and you have acting. And this is very specific to animated storyboards. You're giving out a lot more information than you would necessarily need for live action. So we're just going to focus on how these work with animated boards today. So shots is like the bread and butter of what you're doing. Most of the decisions that you are making, especially up top, are going to be shots. This is where your camera is. And where is in, because it's not actually a physical camera, but you know what I mean, where it is and what are you showing with your frame. There's a lot of different examples online of like the real nitty gritty, every single kind of technical shot. And I think that stuff is important to learn eventually. But what I want to focus on today, like I said, is the intent of shots and kind of like the basic major shot choices and kind of what we can say with those. So you have your close-ups. And your close-ups are for your intimate types of information. So why would you get that close to someone? Are they whispering to you? If they're really quiet, you want to get up really close. Is there something really important about their face? Are they getting up in your face? You know, it's like all of those things where the thing that you were looking at will be basically the only thing that the audience can see on screen. So like this is important. This is, I can't, you know, I'm not looking at a huge city with a bunch of different detail. I am only looking at this person's face or an item. You know, if you put a watch that close on the screen, the audience is going to go, oh, that watch must be important because that's the only thing that I can see right now. You know, I guess unless, you know, Christopher Walken's fingernails are really important in this shot, but in context, we go, oh, okay, like that watch, like that's really important. So what I say a lot is like, what are you expressing in your shot? And that's for all kinds of shots. So here it's like, what you express is very, very specific. And then you go to your medium shots. So you pull out a little bit and you have more detail to work with. So we can see, how is a character posing? Are they holding something? What are their arms doing? We're not quite to legs yet, unless you're doing a medium shot like on the lower half, but usually, you know, it's upper half. What's going on behind them, or what is their scenery look like? You know, if it was just if this shot was just a close-up on Shrek on his face, we'd go like, oh, Shrek's like, he's feeling pretty proud of himself, he's pretty happy. And then you cut out and you're like, oh, I have more information now. He's proud of himself because he's scaring all these people. And that so this frame gives us very different information than if we only had a close-up on Shrek. And then a huge thing that you're going to use your medium shots for is characters talking to each other. Something that I see with a lot of early storyboard artists is they get a little ashamed of their medium shots because they're like, oh, like every shot is a medium shot. And obviously every shot should not be a medium shot, but you will be using a lot of medium shots, especially if you're like me and you work in TV animation and it's a lot of characters talking. It's a lot of, you know, oh, I want to see what's in this kitchen. Let me look, you know, the medium shots are kind of what allows other shots to pop more. So do not be ashamed of using your medium shots. They're very important. And a lot of times they're going to be able to express the information that you're trying to share. Then you have your wide shot. These are more expressive. And what I think is really interesting about wide shots is that they don't always have to express a lot of tangible information. It can also be emotional information. A lot of the times wides are used for yelling. And so like this shot of Furiosa, it's just her in the desert. And you'd say like, oh, well, you know, there's not a lot of information here. But when a character is yelling in a wide, you really feel like, oh, that sound is what's taking up this frame. And also we're seeing her small in a big location. And in this point in the movie, she's just had horrible information. She feels very alone. And so it's like, again, if this was in a medium, we'd say, oh, like she's sad. I can tell that she's sad in her face. But what you're saying here is like, oh, she is alone. She is by herself in this huge space and she is yelling and it's almost pushing us away from her. So thinking about it kind of like that, it's not just details of what you're drawing, but it's details of what you're not drawing, if that makes sense. It can also show a character's outfit or their posture. And so like, oh, what is how they're standing saying, like, what is that saying about them? It can highlight a lot of motion. So like in this shot, you know, if you're running, you want to have that feeling of like that really joyful running. And so you have this wide shot, but it can also highlight a character not moving. So it's like if you have a really wide shot and a character is standing very still, you are saying something about the fact that they are standing so still. And that makes the audience go like, oh, why are they so still? That's so interesting. I want to know more. And then for your extreme wides, it's more of like a, where are we? So again, the bigger the frame, the more information. So here it's like, wow, the city is so dense. There are so many buildings in France and Paris, and we can tell it's Paris because there's the Eiffel Tower. And so even though like our brain is not looking like, oh, I need to, like every single one of these buildings is not important. It's the fact that there are so many buildings, like it's really dense. And on the other side, you can say, oh, this place, we're seeing so much of this place and it's empty. And that tells us something. It's like, oh, this is a really desolate place that this guy is currently at. So again, showing information with your frame does not necessarily mean that you have to be drawing a lot of information. It's just saying something about how much you do or do not draw. And then with your like kind of focal length, I guess you could say, it's a little tough because in animation, I feel like we kind of all fake use camera dialogue or camera lingo. I highly recommend like doing your research and learning about live action camera uses. But a lot of times the people that you're going to work with, like they'll say like for us, we say it's an up shot, which means the camera is down looking up. But a lot of the times in more cinematographer circles, it's a low angle shot because the camera is low. So just be aware of that. But so for an up shot or a low angle shot, those make everything in the camera look taller than the viewer, or whoever the POV shot is. So like this shot from Fantastic Mr. Fox, you're like, oh my gosh, that fox is so tall. He seems so important. He seems so powerful. He's taller than everybody else in this frame, and I'm looking up at him. Makes the character feel really strong. But it can also be, oh my God, it's Godzilla. He's so big. I'm so scared. You know, you're using this to show scale and power. And like I said, power can be positive, it can be uplifting, but it can also be scary. And so again, it's just what are you trying to say with the shot? And in the reverse, you have your down angle, or sorry, your high angle, which is the camera is high, looking down, or we call it a down shot. And down shots make the subject of the frame feel small. So even like the most powerful characters, like the Avengers, if you shoot from above, you're like, oh man, either I or something else is bigger than the Avengers. It makes them feel small and it makes them feel like they're in peril. Or it can make a character feel really vulnerable. One time I saw an article talking about this specific shot from Shawshank Redemption being about vulnerability after we've seen these characters like fight for so long for what they're for their escape. And I really liked how it explained that, because it's almost like a character is letting go of trying to be powerful and just like letting themselves go, like in this scene, to the rain. And feeling small is not necessarily always a bad thing. And I think that's a really fun thing to play around with. It's like, well, why am I making the character feel small here? And always you're mixing all these things up. So say this is shot from Nope. It is a high angle shot looking down in a very, very, very wide shot. We see our character is right here and he's so small, and we see how far he has to go to get away from this big shadow. We're getting so much information from this shot, and it makes us go like, oh my God, I hope his horse can run fast enough to get to safety. And so you're always asking yourself, like, what shot is going to get across the information that I want the audience to feel? And the thing about animation is that it's not just one shot. A lot of your job is figuring out how shots relate to each other, what you're saying by having one shot next to another shot. And so for that, it's our cuts or our editing. Our cuts specifically is going from one shot to another. It's a little confusing. If any of you out there are anime fans, you might know the term cut as like a cut of animation. It's not quite what we're talking about here. This is specifically an editorial thing. So you're asking yourself, okay, when do I cut? When do I not cut? And a lot of the times with editorial, you're answering a question that is in a previous shot. So I want to look at an example. Probably a lot of you guys know this, but I'm just going to talk along with it so that you can kind of get a vibe of like, okay, what do these shots mean? So, we're starting in this kind of neutral, wide, but kind of mid shot, everyone's cut up. We're pushing in close. This guy's expression's really important. It's like, oh, taking his hat off. And then, oh, we're up high. Something's bigger than him. Why is he feeling small? Takes his glasses off for this big close up of this expression. Back to neutral for this woman because she does not know what's going on. She does not feel small yet. But as soon as she looks, and the camera as she's standing up gets above her, and now she also feels small. And we're like, what are they looking at? They're looking at big dinosaurs. And so now we go to the super wide and we see how small they were at the start of this shot, and we see how huge this thing is. And again, next time we cut to them, small again. We are reminding the audience these are small characters now. They are not taking up the full screen. And we are always framing this dinosaur to just be so huge compared to these characters. And those are the kinds of things that you're thinking about, is the relationship of where your character is at and the information that you are trying to share kind of more scripturally. So it's like, we look at this and we say, this is about people meeting dinosaurs. Okay, how does that person feel seeing a dinosaur for the first time? And so you're putting yourself in the head of a character when you're making these choices. I'm trying to think, I'm going to slow down a little bit on this. The other big thing with editorial is pacing. If you have a lot of cuts, like things going boom, 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 that's going to make the audience look like, oh, new information, new information, new information, new information. And that's going to raise your heart rate a little bit, get you a little stressed out. That is very much used for high tension scenes, whereas something that has less cuts, you're like, okay, well, how do I put this? So there's fast tension, and then I think there's slow tension. So you're always asking yourself, do I want the audience to be guessing what's coming next, like to be kind of on their heels, or not on their heels, like leaning forward on about what's next? If you have a long unbroken shot, it really forces your audience to lean forward and say, like, what is going to happen next? Whereas fast shots in like an action scene, it's like, okay, I'm getting information, and you're kind of leaning back, and and you are just being like, I am just going to tell you everything. You don't have to think too hard, just boom, boom, boom. So our final important thing to think about when you're storyboarding is acting, because you are the first actor, basically. For some shows or some projects, you might have a radio play, which is when voice actors or temporary actors will act out a script that you've been given. And you can listen to that and use it as part of your storyboarding process. But I have worked on a lot of shows where that's not the case, where we don't get a radio play or any voice acting at the beginning. And even when you do have voice acting, you're just getting the voice. So you are really driving, what is someone doing with their face? What are they doing with their body? And I think there's something really special about animation, that it can be so precisely done by an artist. Live action actors are amazing at their work. But in animation, it's like every single thing that we choose is for a purpose. And when you're storyboarding, when you're doing acting in your storyboarding, you're going to hear acting described as generally two different styles. You'll have subtle acting, which subtle basically means like, oh, it's like small movements. I'm saying something with just a little bit of motion. And then there's broad acting, which is a lot of movement. And these can all be combined and used different ways for different characters. it's always a question of, okay, if my character is being sly, would they be subtle or broad? If my character is a loud child, would I be doing something subtle or broad? So it's a lot of coming back to the character and the moment and thinking, okay, how do I want to do this? And then also, if you look at these two GIF examples, you're also seeing how shots relate to acting. So this this moment with Lily Gladstone as Molly in Killers of the Flower Moon, if this was as wide as these shots of Jim Carrey in Batman, we would not see all of the detail on this face. And it's the same with drawing for storyboards. So we get up close because what's on her face is really important. Whereas if we were this close to this performance of Jim Carrey, I don't know what we would get out of it. We would just be like, okay, he's running around. There might be fire in the background. I don't know. So it's very important for what it looks incredibly unhinged. So it's really important for when you say, all right, this is the kind of acting I want to do. You then also pick a shot that will highlight what you want to highlight from that performance. And then also, obviously, acting is very important for character relationships. You know, you are using the acting to say how a character feels about another character. Do they love and really want to be with that other character, or do they hate them? You know, these are, you know, we have a wide shot of Lilo and Myrtle here, and a wide shot of I think it's Sasuke and Ponyo. And we're getting extremely different information. It's also, these are both very broad movements. But what I think is really interesting about specifically the Ponyo scene is that Sasuke's movements tend to be very subtle because he's a quieter, he's a quieter character, he's human, and we really want to contrast him with Ponyo, who is this magical character who makes these really big movements. Which I know that this is a lot of information, and I promise there comes a time when it doesn't feel like so much because it becomes kind of second nature. You know what tools are in your pocket, you know, oh, okay, this character's feeling this way. I'm probably going to grab this shot. I'm probably going to look at this acting. But you always need to be asking yourself, no matter if you're brand new, no matter if you've been boarding for 100 years, you will always be coming back to what is the intent. And you start off broad. So think of this as kind of like, I know it's outdated now, but like the food pyramid. You know, so the project is the core of the story that you're trying to tell. There's a good chance that your showrunner or your director will have told you, like, the whole point of this episode is learning a lesson about being kind, or the whole movie is about finding yourself. So you keep in the back of your head all the time, okay, this project is about this thing. So I don't want to do anything that is going to kind of not share that idea unless it's very specifically highlighting an opposite idea. So you always come back to, okay, what's the core of this project? And then you come to what is the intent of the sequence that you're working on. So if you're working on a sequence where, you know, say it's that Myrtle and Lilo moment, you're like, okay, the point of Lilo and Stitch is these two outcasts coming together and creating a family. And the sequence with Lilo and Myrtle is highlighting why Lilo is an outcast, but also what she is dealing with internally. So you're like, okay, we want Lilo to act different than the other girls. We want to highlight why her grieving process is making her act certain ways. And so we stick in that sequence. Okay, that's the point, is that we want to highlight Lilo and maybe also be funny, you know, or funny or interesting, something like that. Like, what are you trying to get out of that sequence specifically? Then you say, okay, what am I getting out of this shot? So if you're like, oh, what's the difference between sequence is multiple shots put together for kind of one scene idea, whereas the shot is just the one frame. What am I trying to say with this frame? So if we go back to the Jurassic Park example, down shot on the point of the sequence is, wow, real dinosaurs. That's crazy. And the point of, say, the shot looking down at our two characters is that they feel small because they're seeing these huge dinosaurs. So, and if you're having trouble knowing what the intent of your shot is, you can always go back to, okay, well, the sequence is about this. So I want to highlight this specific feeling. How do I highlight that feeling using a shot? And then after you figure your shots out, then you go to acting. So these are also in terms, like, these are also kind of ranked in terms of importance for you to focus on. Because if you just get a script and you're like, okay, they have to act like this, and I should probably have a shot like this, and maybe this, it can be really overwhelming. So say, okay, this is what my project is about. All right, I have this sequence. What is the sequence about? Okay, I have the sequence I have a guide for it in my head. And then you start looking at your shots before you even start touching the acting. Figure out your shots. And then once the shots are figured out, then you can go to, oh, okay, I want them to act like this, or I want to see this. I know I want a close up of this face. How am I going to draw this face to really get the emotion out of it? And then after all of that, then you can worry about the bells and whistles. If you guys have seen storyboards that are extremely animated or have a lot of lighting and tone in them, that stuff is not the core of what we do and should never be like the first goal. That's like if you have time, and sometimes, to be honest, adding things like lighting or moving characters around a lot can actually deter from the intent of a scene. Because if you color a scene, with grays, and it makes the audience go like, oh, wait, so they're lit from behind, so there's a light behind them, but we didn't see that in a previous shot. It's like something that might seem like a fun decision for one shot might actually end up taking away from your intent because it becomes confusing. So I'm going to show two examples from shows that I have worked on to kind of go over and see, like, this is how we made these decisions. So here's a quick clip from Molly McGee.
See you tomorrow, Molly.
Have a great night.
Bye. So, you were wrong. I ended the day with a lot of friends.
Ugh, like that's a good thing?
But you were also right, because this day would have been a huge disaster if it weren't for my very bestest best friend ever. Eh?
Oh, me? Oh, no, I am not your friend.
Then why'd you save my first day?
Because otherwise you would be headed to jail and you drag me along and I can't get in that kind of shape.
You can't deny it, Scratch. We're friends, my dude. More than that, we're best friends. Besties!
No, I don't have besties.
We're besties.
No.
We're such besties.
No, I was saving myself for me.
You love me.
I
We're
was a
best friends
throw-off. I
forever.
can't stand.
So that was a pretty simple example. This was something me and one of our board artists, Steve Hurt, boarded for the end of the first episode of Molly McGee. So if we look, yeah, there we go. I'll mute this. So first shot, we have a wide. We see that we're at a school. And it's like, oh, okay, school. We saw her earlier at school, so school's getting out. She's going home. We see some kids waving at her. We're like, oh, she made some friends that day. That's great. So we've established where we are. We see Molly leaving. And then we cut in close because those two characters that we saw before, they are no longer relevant to this scene. Molly will not be talking to them anymore. It's not about them. We don't need to see them anymore. So we cut in closer. We see Molly take out Scratch, who we set up in this episode is this ghost that no one else can see but her. And we're trying to set up that, like, oh, he's really grumpy and doesn't really like her yet, but she really loves him. And so we're trying to get that across in their acting. So we do a lot of stuff where Scratch is pushing her away, or later in the episode, she does the little curly thing to his hair and he puts it away. He's like, no, I don't want that. So we have this medium shot because we're trying to just focus on, these are the two characters that we're following. She leaves. Then we cut in close because Molly at this point is telling us something that's a little bit more personal. She's saying, you know, today would have been a huge disaster if you weren't here. And that's a little bit more intimate. That's a little bit more of her admitting to being scared today. And it's also, by going closer, you'll notice like Scratch comes up closer to her, because even though he doesn't want anything to do with her, he is curious what she's saying. And she's like, oh, is she saying that I did something good? So in this close, we can see him being forced to get close to her to hear what she's saying. And then it's almost like, oh, tricked you into coming closer to me so that I can talk to you. And he's like, oh, no. We're not friends. And so like, here's a moment. Again, we're using acting to show how comfortable she is with him and how uncomfortable he is with her. So then we've gotten this nice little intimate moment with them. Come back wide, because I know I'm like, oh, we want to show that Molly is kind of this fun loving kid. Let's have her jump off of these steps. And to see that, we have to be wide enough to actually see that action. So she does it, and then we get a lot of this wide acting with Scratch where we can see his whole body. We get to have him emote a lot. And we're getting some nice air here. It feels like, okay, like after that little closer intimate moment, this is relaxed. Just two buddies talking. And, you know, we get some more acting with them. A lot of just highlighting their different personalities. And then we go to another wide, but it's a wide in a different direction. So we're seeing them leaving us. And the feeling that we wanted here is kind of this like, oh, they're going away from us out into the sunset for more adventures. Because this is the end of the very first episode. It's like, we want you to feel like, oh, where are they going? I want to know what's next. And then you watch the rest of the series to know that. So that was specifically what we were trying to get from this. But then you also have the contrast of the two types of acting, where Molly's like throwing herself all over the place and Scratch is more static. So these were the kinds of things that we were trying to highlight with this example. Then we go to a more complicated example that might seem like I have no idea what they're trying to say here, but I'll hopefully highlight how the same ideas work here. So this is a clip from the DuckTales episode Astro Boy. Okay, so that what, like I said, it's from Astro Boy. These boards were by me and my director, Jason Zurich. And when I first get scripts that say, then there's like this huge action scene, I freak out because my brain wants to go like, oh my gosh, like, how am I even going to begin to break this down, right? But one of the great things about DuckTales that I really appreciated working on it is that it's a very character and story driven show. So every decision that we are making is about telling a character story. So specifically in this episode, these two oh, you cannot see my hands pointing, sorry. These two characters, this chicken guy, this dog guy, they have both built robots that are also fighting each other in the background. So their little old man fight is being mirrored by this fight of their two robots. So we get this wide shot of them standing together, and you know, we're like, oh haha, they're just doing this little like slappy hand movement. But then as we rise up in the frame and we see the two robots fighting in the sky, we're going like, all right, you see those guys way up there, like this is going to be different, this is going to be more intense. And so, okay, we cut into the one robot. This is Gizmo Duck. So specifically, a lot of the times in action scenes, you might not be having a specific character moment for every single movement. A lot of it's going to be, all right, I'm going to cut here so that you can see how the character is moving. Also, I see that it's already like 2:40, so I'm going to go quick through these. And so, okay, cut so we can see him turn around, cut so we can see that the specific weapon that he's using is this like gun arm thing. We see all the missiles come out. So then we're like, okay, how is the other robot? How is Astro Boy going to react to these weapons? And that's when we see, okay, so we have this panning shot. And the reason that we have all this, we decided to have all this movement with him avoiding it is to show how effortlessly he's moving around. And also one of the big things is I get a question a lot where it's like, well, can the intent of something just to be like, it's cool or it's funny? And yes, absolutely. But just make sure that it also works, because if your intent's like, I just want to make something really funny and it's in the moment of like this big robot fight that's supposed to be really intense, it might not work. So here, a lot of times we're like, okay, well, can we make this look cool? Cool, but still get the idea of the episode across. So close up so we can see a hard punch. You know, sorry, it's a little hard for me to drive this. But so if this punch was farther away, it wouldn't feel as impactful because we'd be like, oh, well, you know, his head only moved a little bit, so it's probably not that big of a deal. But when it's close up and like the whole frame is brought, like the whole frame has Gizmo Duck's head in it and we see it move really far, it feels really intense and it feels like there's more impact there. And then we cut back. Again, so these characters specifically are comedy. So we have the intense robot fight where one gets hit in the face, and then the old man version of that is getting your glasses knocked off. Again, the two older guys hit each other in the head by accident. The two robots hit each other in the head on purpose. We have an impact frame there to make it feel more intense. And so that was how we looked at doing the sequence, is like, we want to be able to echo these ideas of the two fights, one being funny, one being really intense. And we also wanted to show how powerful this little tiny robot was compared to the really big robot. And here we have a great example of when we would use a wide for that. We see how small that we don't need to see every single thing happening in this shot detail wise, but just seeing this little tiny guy hitting this huge robot over and over and over again tells us like, oh, he's really powerful and he's able to beat this guy. So that's what we were thinking when we did this. Really quickly, it's really important to understand your story. If you're doing a sitcom type show, you're going to want to be flatter. That tends to be funnier. You get more information in for a gag and it feels simpler. Whereas like on an action kind of adventure show, your shots, even if it's just characters standing around, will be more dynamic. But sometimes your sitcom show has a really emotional episode. And sometimes your adventure show has an episode where all the characters are stuck in a sitcom universe and it's all flat shots for that reason. So it's always coming back to like, how are we going to do this? Like, what is the intent of the episode? This is, again, just very, very quickly. I always like to encourage people, lean into your inspirations and what you love and genres you love. This is, at the time that we were boarding this one episode of DuckTales, I was really into Twin Peaks: The Return. And we just happened to have an episode that was about a character who was kind of dealing with like a good version and a bad version of himself in like a dream sequence. And so like I used kind of a reference, like that idea. I was like, oh, how can I use something kind of like Twin Peaks? It's tough because each one of these topics I could talk about for hours. So I'm trying not to do that. Really quickly before we go to Q&A, and if you guys have more questions about this specifically, since I'm going to go through it pretty fast, just let me know. I wanted to really quickly show you the process of how we do it at my job. So you start off with thumbnails, which are very, very quick boards for you to like figure out your shot ideas just for yourself. These are some of my thumbs from Big City Greens. No one's going to see your thumbs. Don't worry about it. It's mostly just for you to kind of like play with ideas like, oh, what if I had this close up of Cricket and it like went in close on his face, and like, oh, what if I had this? And I don't know. So this is just a way for you to start, figuring your ideas out. Then you'll have a roughs phase where you have like a more of a shorthand version of these characters and, quickly draw out like, oh, maybe it'd be cool if they went down like this, but it's a little bit, this is something that your supervisors are going to see. So you need to slow down with your drawings enough that they can tell what's going on, but it does not have to be like a perfect drawing. For this board from DuckTales, we had Mark Beeks doing this really cool like dance on a Segway. And so my roughs for that are really, really rough drawings about what those poses could look like. So you're figuring things out in roughs, and they just have to be legible enough for your supervisor to then give you notes. So this is an example of an episode of Big City Greens that I did, where in the roughs version, this character Chip goes down a grate by, you know, opening it up and sliding down in this upshot. And they were like, oh no, like what if these are drawings from the showrunner, Chris Houghton. He was like, oh, what if we actually we're looking up at him and he's feeling powerful and kind of scary, and he looks down at the grate and then he jumps in and then gets washed away, you know. And so we would have these meetings where we'd pin everything up and people would come in with Post-its and come up with ideas. And sometimes also your notes are going to involve rewriting. And sometimes that's part of your job. But that's very much like up to the call of the showrunner. So in this show, the showrunner is like, oh, I want to rewrite this one part. So how about like we have the TV saying this while this character is being stalked from outside. Let's add this line when this character takes his mask off. And that's something that you should always be open to, is that things can change. And that's why you draw very rough for your roughs, is that things will probably change. And then from there, you go to cleanups. So these are drawings that will then be taken to, these are your blueprints that will be taken to the animators. And so here's like a final version of that scene from Chipped Off. We see we used an upshot for this character. We see how he gets down in this grate. And so again, these drawings are not perfect. They're not meant to be, but they're very clear on what's going on. And every kind of show has its kind of own storyboarding language. When I worked on, again, I did not board on Puss in Boots, but this is a Benjuano board. That was a CG show. So you had CG environments that you could use, and really like it'll let you use more camera movements, because since everything was going to be in CG, it was not going to be expensive to move the camera. On Big City Greens, that show is animated 2D in a way that is very much like kind of traced over your drawings as a storyboard artist. So it's really important on that show to be very, very on model. This is a final cleanup drawing. On DuckTales, it was also 2D drawn, but in a style that let us be simpler with our storyboards. This is the final storyboard of Launchpad and Gosalyn, and we don't have every single detail on that. And then with Molly McGee, that show was puppets. So as long as the proportions were right and we told them what kind of facial expressions and acting that we wanted, the drawings did not have to look exactly like the models. So sorry, that was a little bit longer than I meant, but hopefully this is a helpful kind of intro to what we do as storyboard artists and the kinds of things to think about. And yeah, always come back to what kind of story are you trying to tell? What kind of thing are you trying to say in the moment? What is your intent? All right, Q&A. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sam, for squeezing so much amazing information.
I know
about
it was too much. I'm sorry.
into a short amount of time. It was very thorough, and I think I speak for the audience in saying thank you so much for preparing so much information for us today. All right, let's hit the Q&A. So one of the first questions we have here is from our friend Joshua. How do you flow the script and the storyboard, I think, to be the same thing? I guess, how do you
that's a
conform
great
the
question.
storyboard to the script that you receive?
Yeah, so that's like that is kind of the core of what we're doing, especially on something like a show where it's not your personal idea, you're getting someone else's work, you're getting the writer's ideas as your script. It's interesting because I actually kind of, when I start working from a script, I go to my favorite moments first. I don't board it in order. I'll say like, oh, I have a very clear idea for this scene where someone like screams into the rain. So I'll draw that, and then I'll work backwards to get to that moment. And sometimes it's not super clear cut. a lot of the times it's not super clear cut. You'll draw a moment that you think you really love, and then when you start working on the flow, you're like, oh, that moment wouldn't actually work that way. Okay. And then you'll have to go back and change it. But it's yeah, never feel like you have to board in chronological order, especially when you're starting a script, like when you're in your thumbs phase. Do what you think is going to be most impactful, and then go back and start working in chronological order to get yourself to that impact. I hope that that makes sense, but it's also asking yourself, again, this comes back to the intent thing. It's like, oh, okay, how is this scene supposed to feel? So the writer wants this scene to feel somber and sad, and you're like, okay, well, how do I make it flow that way? So if something's somber, it's not going very fast. Okay, I'll use a wide shot where a character can be in the shot for a long time and make them feel sad. So you're asking yourself, what is, if you're specifically focusing on flow, you're asking yourself like, oh, okay, in editorial, when this is playing, how do I want it to feel? And then how can I echo that in my shot choices? I hope that makes sense.
I think that makes great sense. All right. One overall question. How long does it usually take to storyboard? I know that can vary greatly depending on, what is at hand, series or feature, but maybe if you could give a few overall examples.
Yeah. So for TV, the most general I've seen is about a 6-week sequence. So we have 3 weeks for roughs, because they try and give you an equal amount of time to figure out the storyboard and to clean it. So if you're on, say, Big City Greens, which is an 11-minute episode, they'll have 2 board artists split that episode in half. So you'll have, 6-7 minutes worth of content to storyboard to figure out rough in 3 weeks. And then you'll have a pitch and you'll get your notes. And hopefully at that point, a lot of stuff has been figured out. And so then you can focus the next 3 weeks on cleanup. So making the drawings look the way that you want them to look for the animators, and also addressing notes. Sometimes if things get really complicated, you might shift that a little bit. Like if you're like, oh, I have to draw this really complicated character, you might do shorter roughs so you can really quickly figure out these shots and then spend more time cleaning them up to get all the detail that you need. But it's very different depending on different projects. I know feature, you can work on one sequence for months just trying to like noodle it. But that's not where I come from, so I don't want to speak on that too much. But yeah, usually about 3 weeks for roughs and 3 weeks for cleans in TV.
Great. All right. Some folks are asking about how to get their start in storyboarding. So curious to know, how did you get into storyboarding? How can one get into storyboarding? Especially if you're just realizing now, maybe in high school, that this is something that you want, that you may be interested in pursuing.
Well, and if you're figuring out in high school, you are way ahead of me, because I mentioned going to Cal Arts. I had no idea what I wanted to do there. I did not know that I wanted to be. I had a teacher who kind of go like, I don't know if you can be a storyboard artist. And I was like, okay, I guess I can't. And I just kind of gave up on it for years. And then when I was a PA on Puss in Boots, I actually started doing indie comics. I would do shows like Cala, which is here, TCAF in Toronto. And I was making both autobio and like little fictional comics. And that made me go like, oh, like I love telling stories through visuals. And so that got me started. And then once I realized that, that's when I applied for the job on Clarence. And revision jobs are great for getting you, like, I feel like storyboarding is one of the few jobs in animation that does have like an apprentice level job built in. And so a revisionist, what you're usually doing is you're following notes from a director to update or fix a storyboard, to get it more towards the showrunner or the director's vision. And so through that, you're getting a lot of notes. You're like, oh, okay, he's changing it to this for this, or she's you know, taking this shot and putting it in front of this other shot for this reason. And you get a lot of hands-on experience about decision making. But then there's also there is so much stuff online nowadays. There is a YouTuber who no longer makes work, but I have been obsessed with since I was, you know, in college, called Every Frame of Painting, which
Such a great resource.
it's amazing. Like, and also just watching stuff that you like if they're, you know, I'm really into horror. And so when I'm watching a horror movie, and I kind of wish I could turn this part of my brain off, but I can't. I'm always like, oh, why did that scare me? Why did that make me feel this way? Like, why did I lean into the TV? You know, so if there's something that you really love, go back and look at those choices and ask yourself, like, okay, why did that make me feel this way? Or why did they make that choice? Or why didn't they show this thing? You know, there's so much growth that can just happen out of passion. You know, and that's another thing too. If you want to practice, like if there's a book or a comic or something that you really love and you're like, oh, I want to try, or a game. I'm currently trying to do like a little fan storyboard from Bloodborne to kind of practice action boarding. Take something that you really love and practice using that. I think that's very helpful. And then there are also classes. I don't know if BRIC offers them, but there are things like BRIC and CDA in Pasadena. I tend to be careful. I love resources like that, but they can be expensive. So definitely start by looking at things that are free online. And when you feel like, oh, all right, like I need to go to the next, it's CDA, Concept Design Academy. It's a art school in Pasadena that does kind of like night classes. A lot of people who work in the industry tend to go there. You know, it's like I've taken storyboarding classes after work there before. But I would definitely start with all the free resources that you can find, because there is a lot out there, and just watch stuff that you love.
In addition to watching stuff that you love and seeking out those free resources, are there any storyboarding specific practices that you would recommend?
Yeah, so there's a big one is doing what is it called? Doing like frame studies. So I've seen people, you know, go through and say, like, look at their favorite scene from Star Wars and draw all the boards, you know, to practice, like, oh, like, how did they set up this shot? Or how did, you know, again, I am always careful recommending that, because I've seen some people do those frame studies and get really into like, oh, like shading, like how did the lighting look? How did this look? And it's like, that's not the most important thing. Go back to those basics that we talked about. What's the acting? What's the shot? How are they cut? I'm trying to think. I don't know. It's funny, because so the kind of software that we use, Storyboard Pro, again, is expensive. And the thing is, the first show that I ever worked on, the first show a lot of us worked on, shows, or, you know, from like 10 years ago, all used Post-it notes. I'm a big fan of just take like 4 Post-it notes and be like, how much of a story can I tell in these 4 Post-it notes? You know, don't worry too much about the software, the technical side. Like you can storyboard in Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint or on paper. Like, just start by focusing on learning how to make your shot choices and your cut choices. You'll get to the software, you'll get to, you know, lighting, all that kind of stuff. Just go as bare bones as you can and just focus on making those decisions.
Amazing. All right. Let's see. Do you have any general advice for someone who is working on their portfolio for storyboarding and trying to break in?
Yes. So focus on what you love for sure. I feel like that advice, you know, it's like when I was doing my portfolio, I was like, oh, I have to have an action thing and I have to have a comedy thing and I have to have that. But I was not good, and I'm still working on being, you know, suitable for action. Whereas like comedy stuff came to me really quick. So for right now, like focus on what makes you excited and what you want to be drawing more than what you think someone wants you to draw. We're in a really great time right now where there is a ton of different projects where you have Princess and Pony and Vox Machina. Like there is a huge range of stuff. And so whatever style you are drawn to, there will be jobs for that. So focus on what you like, and then you can still diversify that without going so far. You know, if you do like doing like Molly McGee, don't feel like you have to do Molly McGee and Vox Machina boards. It's like, okay, I'll take this style of boarding, like something like Molly McGee, and I'll do a funny thing where there's like no dialogue. I'll show how funny I can be without any dialogue. And then I'll take these same characters and draw them in a sad moment. You know, you can still show that you can do different kinds of moments without going so far outside your comfort zone that you're not actually showing your best foot. Because that's the big thing, is you want to show people what you are good at. You can always get better at other stuff, but you want to, especially when you're trying to get a job, you want to show them what you're the best at.
Perfect. That's sound advice. Sam, I know we're at time. We have, it seems like a few more Q&A questions. Do you still have
I have some time, yeah.
around to answer?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay,
Well,
cool. Yeah,
going
that
for
makes
a
me
little
feel
bit
better
more.
too for going over time. So
No, it's all good. I mean, it was so helpful. Okay, so speaking of that big range that does exist in terms of styles of shows, how would you go about boarding a sequence in a style that you may not be used to?
So big thing, there's a lot of examples. Like there's a lot of stuff online now where you can like say like, oh, like, okay, I want to board something like, you know, like we'll say Vox Machina or Avatar, you know, like Korra, Last Airbender, that kind of stuff. So go look at what those board artists have done, but then look at what they're inspired by. Because a lot of times they'll also, you know, you'll go to someone's Twitter and you'll be like, oh, this is such a cool board sequence. How did they do it? And then you'll be like, oh, they're super inspired by Jackie Chan movies or by certain anime. And look at what they're taking from those things to get there. And a big thing, like something that I personally run into, I'm still learning to be better at like anatomy for certain shows, like, you know, like an Avatar, a Last Airbender, or a Vox Machina, or like superhero shows like Justice League type stuff. Anatomy is really important. And you will have to say like, okay, if I want to work on a show like that, I need to practice anatomy. And so then that's when you kind of go outside of just storyboarding and you take figure drawing classes, or you use, I know there's a couple like online figure drawing tools where it'll time you and you'll sketch stuff out. Study bones, study muscles, like that stuff is really important. And then if you're working towards something like a Molly McGee or a SpongeBob or something like that, it's like, okay, you don't necessarily have to know anatomy super well, but you need to know slapstick. You know, it's like, okay, well, what makes slapstick funny? And that's when you go look at Three Stooges or Charlie Chaplin. And, you know, so it's a lot of like looking at people who do what you want to do and then taking one more layer off of that onion and say like, okay, well, what inspires them? Where do they get their information from? And go back to kind of the source. And a lot of the times, if you can kind of find a live action-y thing that is similar to what you want to board, that can help a lot. And I know that can seem like kind of like anti-animation. That's not what I mean. Animation is special because of what it can do that live action can't. But you'd be really surprised how much can be done in live action and how much inspiration, like even say if you just went into your backyard right now or into the park and like just did a cartwheel, you would find so much humor and movement that you would not expect from that. Like if I did a cartwheel, I know I'd fall over in a very specific way and I'd be like, oh, like that's funny. And that's a funny thing that I didn't think of before. Like that wasn't in my head. So yeah, like just going back and like looking at stuff that is like what you want to make. That was a very long answer. I'm sorry.
Oh, that was great. Love that. Speaking of movement, Abigail had asked, how do you know when there is too much movement or not too much for the character?
Yeah. So again, that comes back to that intent thing a lot. It's
versus broad.
Yeah. So so say you were taking those two examples that I showed, Molly from Killers of the Flower Moon and Riddler, and you're in a scene where, you know, it's just supposed to be like Molly's like looking over at someone and it's kind of like, hello. But if she was also waving her arms, I would be looking at that and I'd be like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be getting from this scene, you know. Or you could bring someone and say, like, in your head, you're like, oh yeah, the waving arms are totally important for this. And then you bring in like your friend to look at it and they're like, I don't, what are the waving arms for? You know, like if it's distracting from something that you're, and it's, if the information you're trying to get across does not come across because of how much movement there is, that's a huge sign. Something that I think is really big right now in younger storyboarding circles is that people will see storyboards by like Kyle Molina Ortiz from Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, those like super big, super animated boards, or something from Ben Joanno from Moon Girl, and they'll see a lot of movement and they'll think, oh, that equals good storyboards. But the thing is, like, those guys are really smart about how they choose to do that. First of all, we do not, I have never had to draw that much or move, like animate that much ever in my life. It's very much, that's their choice to do that. But I've seen a lot of boards that choose to move the character a lot, or like do that thing where you kind of like grab a character, like shift it around. And I don't know what's happening in it because there's a lot of movement, but the movement is not specific. The movement is not telling me anything about the character or what they're doing, or it's telling me too much information. Like, you know, even something as simple as a character crossing the frame, like just walking across the frame. If you take a character that has its two legs out, like, you know, like this, and you make them go whoop, across the frame, I totally know what's going on. But if you're trying to add a lot of drawings just to add them, and you have a character going like across the screen, I'm gonna go, oh, okay, are they like, is there a reason that they're walking this specific way? Like, I don't really understand. Whereas on the flip side, if you're doing something where you really want it to be like, okay, I want this character to be marching, you know, or something, you're like, I want them to be like doing this very specifically. Then you take the most important information of that movement. So it's like, all right, they have to have their one leg out really far. Or if they're like, I want them to have a really big stride, and you draw the two legs really far apart. Just from that one drawing of the two legs really far apart, I will understand, or your supervisor will understand, or whoever's looking at your boards will understand, oh, okay, this character is taking really long strides for a reason. But we don't need a ton of movement to say that. Like, it's always, if you're thinking about it in animation terms, it's your keys. Like, the keys are really important. And always ask yourself, is there a simpler way for me to draw this? One more example, just because it's something that I've gotten really caught up on, is in acting. You know, I love really subtle acting. I love to make characters cry, but a lot of the times I'll draw like all these like wrinkles on a character's face to like have like, you know, like, oh, they're so upset and their eyes are so like squinted shut and tears are falling out. And usually it's just too many lines. Like the emotion or the expression ends up getting lost in all of the drawing that I'm trying to do. So start with it as simple as possible, and then, you know, you can build it up. And then I say it's kind of like that you know, getting dressed metaphor. It's like, you can probably take two things off. You can probably take two of those panels away, or you can probably take two of those lines off the face, you know. Yeah.
Got it. So keep it simple, but remember the intent.
Yeah, remember, I would say even more than keep it simple, keep it specific.
Specific, that's good.
Yeah, always say, what is the most specific way I can get this across?
Amazing. So speaking of a lot of storyboards that are out there, like you mentioned, Stephanie had asked, does storyboarding include making animatics, or does that step into a totally different position closer to animating? Where does that kind of fall in terms of the storyboard artist's responsibility?
So this, someday, hopefully you will all be in the animation guild, and this will be one of the big things that is talked about all the time. So at baseline, storyboard artists should not be timing out their work, because that is an editor's job. Oh, really quick, I just saw the Animation Guild thing. The Animation Guild is something that you join when you get a union job. So you have to be working at a union job and then you will join the guild automatically. But yeah, so baseline, you guys are just choosing shots, choosing acting, and then your editorial team will time everything out. There has been some gray area with that in the past couple of years. I've been on shows where we we loosely time things out. A lot of the times it's to help sell jokes along with dialogue. So we'll get something called a radio play, which will be all of the recorded lines put together as if you're kind of listening to almost like an audiobook version of the script that you have. And, so say you have a character who goes like, oh, what? They want, they'll be looking for you to say like, okay, give us one pose for the oh, and then put the what with that. And so they'll kind of want you to put the boards with the radio play to kind of help sell like, oh, I'm doing this to sell this line. Like I said, it gets into a gray area. It gets into like even a political gray area of like what we're allowed to do, what we're not. But in general, no. Again, to go back to people like Ben Juano and Kyle Molina Ortiz, a lot of times that they choose to do something like that, they have a very, very specific idea in mind for a movement or for timing. And that is something that I always say, like, if you feel like you need to be really specific, go for it. But it's also something that I think is really advanced, to be completely honest. If you're not 100% sure how you want something to be timed, just leave it to the editor. That is their job. They will figure that out. Also, most shows have something, well, not so much anymore, but a lot of shows have something called a timing director or a timer. And they literally take your drawing and go like, okay, the editor decided that this drawing of someone kicking is however many frames, and they will go through and do an X sheet, which I'm sure a lot of you guys have learned about, in school. They will do an X sheet that has the exact timing for everything for the animators. So there are people whose jobs it is to do the timing. And we specifically don't want those people to lose their jobs. That's been another big conversation we've had, is like, we need timers, we need really good editors. So we try to, as storyboard artists, step back and let them do their work.
That's great. And in terms of breaking into the unions, Joshua, I also just wanted to plug as well, during our BRIC Summit on Saturday, we will actually have a panel that's all about breaking into the unions. And I believe there will be a representative of the Animation Guild present there too. So if you want to learn more about that, you can tune in on Saturday.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Ruben was wondering, before you started working in storyboards, did you create a schedule for yourself to practice drawing every day?
Oh, I mean, I should have for sure, my brain doesn't super work like that. I try and be more schedule oriented now that I am like working and I have freelance, and I'm like, okay, I need to set these things up. But it was more like I tried to put myself in situations where I wanted to draw, if that makes sense. So like I would make time to, like, I love cafe sketching. It's something that I wish I did more nowadays. But when I was in high school, I know you said, I think there's some people here in high school. I am not a big sports person. I went to so many high school sports games so that I could draw while people were playing. It was like really helpful for figure drawing. Same in college. CalArts didn't have sports, but if your college does have sports, I highly recommend going to sports events or festivals, or just something where it's like stuff that you wouldn't normally draw, and like force yourself to sketch from life with that kind of stuff. But I was never really good at like scheduling. I think saying like specifically like, oh, like I'm going to take this hour to draw can be kind of a little like decision paralysis for me. Like, it's more like, oh, I'm going to go to the Getty and get inspired however I get inspired by going to that museum. So it might be I look at paintings for a while and I think like, oh, like the way that they got this emotion across in this painting is so incredible. Like I want to make a note of that. And then I go to the gardens there and I'm like, oh, I want to draw these flowers. They're so beautiful. You know, it's putting yourself in a situation that you'll be inspired by. Same with watching stuff that you really love, reading stuff that you love. I always joke that the summer that I got really into the webcomic Homestuck was like the summer that I like my drawing ability went like, because I was drawing so much fan art. So it's like, figure out something that is going to inspire you and you're going to want to draw, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And also maybe carrying a sketchbook wherever you go, whenever that inspiration might hit.
Yes, exactly.
Love that. Athena asked, is it best to start off with an internship/apprenticeship, or is it better to just go for it when it comes to going into the industry?
So I would say, I mean, whichever ends up happening for you, because I know people who have come from all different kind of walks when it comes to that. Like I said, the only internship that I ever had was on an animated show, but it was a production internship. So I wasn't drawing for that job. I was, you know, doing files and learning how to be a production assistant. And when I was at Cal Arts, I never got any of the like drawing. I never got like the big Pixar internships or anything like that. And you know, things worked out fine for me, you know, so my path just looks a lot different than say, you know, someone who might have gone to like a Pixar internship and learned how they do art there and then gotten a job there. Absolutely always apply if you're interested in that kind of thing. You know, I'd say that if say you really want to be a storyboard artist, maybe don't apply for like a writing apprenticeship at Nickelodeon, you know, because even if you get it, that's not really what you want to do. And that like I've always found like getting into situations where you're not super passionate about it, you're going to feel it and your boss is going to feel it. And a lot of the great things about internships is soft skills, like learning like how to interact on a team. So, and to that point, I loved my production internship and I highly recommend stuff like that for people, but just understand that if you're in a production internship, that it is for learning about animation production. You can always find time to talk to, like I was able to talk to the storyboard artists on Transformers Prime. I was able to talk to the character designers. But yeah, so, you know, apply for what you want to do, and work towards that. Yeah, I think that's my answer.
That's great. Well, we are 20 minutes over, so I don't want to take up any more of your time already. But Sam, thank you again so much for this. Is there any place that our guests can find you or maybe contact you?
Yeah,
Instagram, social, anything?
yeah, I am on Twitter, Twitter, at
X, Twitter.
Twitter, yeah, whatever you call it now, at Samantha C. King. That's just the letter C. My email is there in my profile. I'm also on LinkedIn. I don't really know how the LinkedIn names work. Just look for Sam King. Hopefully I will come up. And yeah, if anyone has any questions and wants to follow up with me, feel free. This has been amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you so much, everyone,
Thank you,
especially for
Sam.
letting me go over time.
Yeah, thank
Oh
you so
yeah,
much,
we're
Sarah.
happy to. I mean, this was such a great discussion. Thank
And
you
thank you,
for
Danny, as well.
allowing
Thank
us to
you.
extend it too. All right. Well, thanks so much everyone for joining. Be sure to, you know, keep following BRIC Foundation on social media. We have many more of these coming up across animation, VFX, gaming. So stay tuned for the next one.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye,
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.